There are no gods. There are no gods in the universe. No nations, no money, no human rights, no laws, and no justice outside the collective imagination of human beings. These words are from historian and author Yuval Harari, who writes that what made Homo sapiens the most successful was our ability to believe in shared fictions. Religions, nations, and money, he argues, are all fictions that have enabled collaboration and organization on a massive scale. It seems to me that everybody is talking about story. George, who seems to be the flavor of our moment, starts his new book, Out of the Wreckage, talking about how stories shape our world. He says stories are the means by which we navigate the world. Jennifer Mason, professor of sociology at the University of Manchester, expands our understanding, stating that one way that knowledge of social reality is elicited is through the stories people tell about their experience. Charles Eisenstein, author, public speaker, and degrowth activist, sees stories as a system of agreements and narratives that scaffold our world. He recognizes that in a complex society, power arises from these stories. He warns that people cannot hold a new story by themselves. A story can be held only in community. Professor Ian Hargreaves, initiator of the idea of creative citizen and the Creative Cardiff Network, sees the importance of stories in binding groups to cooperate and take collective action. Catherine Goldman-Schuller, whose work as an organizational consultant has focused on developing wise leaders and healthy organizations, says, "Our stories are the soil from which we create the new." She said, "I discovered that humans could imagine what might be possible and aim to create it, to make it real. I saw that the power to create the new could come from our visions of what is possible." The Transition Network's Reconomy projects supports communities to transform their local economies. When it comes to creating shared vision and purpose, they say one of the most powerful things we can do to change our society is to change the stories we tell ourselves and each other. Knowing that all creative endeavor sees us standing on the shoulders of giants, I will begin here also with story. I'll ask lots of questions. I'm not sure if I have answers. Perhaps my questions will resonate with you. Perhaps you will intuitively know the answer. Perhaps asking the question is more important anyway. How can we, as individuals within communities, have new social imaginings? How can we create new narratives for our time? We have to change how we think about ourselves and the world. Can we do this through the stories we tell? For me, the story we need to start learning how to tell in order to, as George says, infect the minds of people is that of how we really do begin to start living more sustainably on the earth and not just fussing around the edges like we are now. In Wales, debate about sustainability is on the table. We are lucky to be world leaders in having legislation to protect our future generations. Everyone in Wales is talking about the well-being of future generations. That's got to be a good thing. But what few people talk about is what actions they are willing to take in their own everyday lives to support the move to a more sustainable future. How might we use stories to get more people thinking and acting on everyday sustainability? I am eager to imagine a better world. Here's a story for today. It's a future vision. It embodies all the hope I have for a more sustainable future. I live in an urban village called Penarth. It was a Victorian seaside town on the edge of the city of Cardiff before it got subsumed by the sprawl. It is still fondly known as the Garden by the Sea. The year is 2037. I have just turned 60. I live in a co-housing community. It's a block of 1960s maisonettes and is an example of an early model of shared ownership. Each dwelling has a share and a vote. The site council that sees to decision-making is made up of a rolling voluntary commitment from all residents. Each dwelling gets a one-year tenure. There are 12 seats on the council. Each year, all dwelling numbers are placed in a digital hat. 12 are chosen at random. In order to maintain consistency and stability, there are also 3 elder seats. Elders can sit for a maximum of 7 years. Their role is to support continuity. Maintenance and upkeep is primarily done by the residents. Local community enterprises might be called in for larger jobs. Residents enjoy a community garden. There is a shared workshop where one can access tools for gardening and DIY, and a laundry. We realised a long time ago that each dwelling having its own washer and dryer was a crazy way to be carrying on. Most people store a bicycle in one of the hangars outside their block. Some people have electric bikes. There are lots of hills here. We have 3 electric cars and a van which we share. We used to have over 200 parking spaces on our land. Not now, no need for them. That space is filled with raised beds and a polytunnel. We compost all our own green waste and use it to fertilise our garden. We yield enough fruit and veg in the summer months for us all to enjoy a healthful meal each day. When it's warm, we sit at the long tables and share that meal together. We are never short of people who want to work in the garden. We work in symbiosis with our local community. Our energy comes from the community municipal. The grid is fed from farms in the rural hinterlands and from offshore wind, as well as other forms of regionally produced renewables. We fitted solar on our expansive flat roof, so we also feed the grid ourselves. We retrofitted passive systems, so we use no energy to heat our homes at all. Our internet comes from the community internet service. It is virtually free. We pay a small maintenance charge each year for upkeep. We have a food assembly where items are purchased in bulk from a range of local producers and distributed among us to save on costs. Farm to plate is the norm. No food travels more than 30 miles. Most food is distributed through a network of cargo bikes, so it's more likely grown less than 10 miles away. We eat seasonal produce. We don't see pineapples anymore, and nuts are rare. Mostly we have hazelnuts, chestnuts, and walnuts. I haven't seen a Brazil for years. But that's all we haven't worked out how to grow in the farmeries. The young people who are into minimalism came up with the idea of the farmeries. They stopped buying stuff and the shopping centres slowly began to close. A group of urban farm activists negotiated to run an experiment in the Queen's Arcade, one of the oldest shopping centres. They managed to crowdfund a swanky hydroponics get-out, and within months they were producing enough salad to supply all the independent restaurants on the nearest high street. That was just the beginning. Our own high street is unrecognisable. When I was 40, I remember we had Costa, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Co-op, Edinburgh Woolen Mill. They are no more. 15 years ago, the local people took back the town council, a form of flat-pack democracy like that which came out of Frome in the early years. The first thing they did was roll out a huge campaign for shopping local. People just stopped buying from the big names. They left when they realised the town was just not profitable anymore. The other thing that happened, which changed our high streets, was that the regional council implemented a long fought for regulation on scaling and multiple ownerships. Profit-making businesses were banned from scaling. This meant the rise of the chains we saw was stopped in its tracks. Cafes, shops, services. If you wanted to open a business, you could open one. That was it. No more could one individual own 5 cafes in different suburbs of the city. This brought a flourishing bricolage of independence to the high street. Its aim was to support more social and community enterprise at hyper-local level. What we have now is a thriving artisan economy. Our local food store is 100% packaging free. You have to take your own renewables. You just cannot buy high-fat, high-sugar, high-salt processed foods anymore, except in the eccentric shops in the arcades. Most people can't afford to buy that stuff now anyways. Most people can't afford to buy anything with sterling anymore. Since the rise of the local currency, sterling went out of favour, being the preserve of the uber-rich. And as they got outcast, sterling became useless for most people. Now we have the Penarth pound. It's basically a digital exchange tool. I get top-up on my chip from community work I do. I can only spend this in local places. I also get citizens' income, which I can spend anywhere, a monthly sum paid to every person from birth to death. The only place where you really see cars these days is in rural communities. There is an exclusion zone around our town, so you can't drive there anyway. You have to park up and borrow a bike to get near. Our cycling infrastructure is world-leading. You think Copenhagen is good, you should see what we've done in South Wales. Everyone rides bikes, it's just the norm. We have a volunteer-run community bike shop. This is where my husband can be found most days. We have a library of things on the corner of every block and terrace. I remember there being a corner shop there when I was a child. Now it's more drills than newspapers. They have weekly repair cafes so you can go and learn how to fix stuff. We barely throw anything away now. We just mend and we make. There's a hub on the high street where you can go to use facilities to make clothes. There's 3D printers. You can make anything really. And there's always someone there to show you how to do it. Not many people go to work in traditional firms anymore. There aren't many left. Most people spend time on the urban farms, the hubs where they do the skill sharing, or in the sheds. Big workshops for making art and performance and theatre and science and all things creative. This is what the children do as well. They learn more from actually living than they do from sitting in classrooms learning about living. There are always learning opportunities to be had, and they are open to all. Most of the old school buildings were turned into sheds. They are now centres for learning and adventure. It's pretty nice living here. I have time to write when I want and make things. Time to be with friends and neighbours. Time to live and grow and connect. This is the world I would like to live in. It holds all the elements of a sustainable community. It's a long way from reality for me in the place where I live now. For some of you, depending on where you live, these things will be more available. These things are not imaginary creations. These things exist, but usually not all together in one place. Perhaps it is the way we tell our own stories, then, that has power for us as individuals who seek change in the world. Perhaps we can use our collective imaginations to extrapolate to the future we all want. The contemporary zeitgeist seems to be calling for a move beyond individualism towards community. In towns and cities across the globe, we are witnessing the emergence of a myriad of projects and initiatives that all seek to harness the power of the collective, to bring us together, building social capital, that which bonds us. More and more, we are becoming aware of our interdependency, of our deep interconnectedness with the world around us. When I was 10 years old, I remember travelling in the car on Easter Sunday morning to church, past the Victorian boating lake where the swans live. On the road, a swan had been run over. In an instant, as I saw the dead swan, I was overtaken by a deep rupture of pain. The tears flooded, I bawled and bawled. I think this was the moment when I knew about this deep connection. Looking back, I think it was also a lesson in suffering. Later on, I came to know that swans mate for life, and on hearing the poet laureate, Gillian Clarke, tell a tale a year or so ago about how she came to write a poem after she saw a swan die, and the RSPB took its dead body back to its mate, so that he knew she was dead. If they hadn't, that swan would have pined and searched for his mate for the rest of his days. Why does that hurt so much and at the same time feel so joyful? Why does that rupture my soul? How might I use story now to conjure this kind of emotional resonance, to wake people up to the collective destruction we are inflicting on our earth? The social entrepreneur, Premal Shah, believes that connecting people creates empathy. Empathy creates generosity. In a world where so many people are disengaged with the problems we face, it's essential to human scale the problem and create pathways for everyday people to help. I wonder how we might use story to encourage all folk to give generously of themselves in the pursuit of a more sustainable future. How can we create a drive towards everyday sustainability? A few years ago, when I was learning to be a teacher of adults and spent time trying to successfully deliver classes to groups of young people with behavioural issues, I recognised that there was nothing I could do to change the behaviour of the individual. I saw that the only thing I could change was what I did in order to get a different response. Later, when I came to be interested in understanding how social change works, I applied this learning to discern that the only way I can change the world is to change myself. I think that Gandhi might have come to this insight first, but hey-ho. And now I know about the strange attractors, and this all makes sense. The Lorentz strange attractor has come to be more commonly known as the butterfly effect, after Lorentz suggested that the flap of a butterfly's wings might cause a tornado. It's about how small changes can have large consequences. I can change the world, and you can too. It may be so that individual behaviour change does not address the structures of power or change the system, but there is power in individual action, no less. The strange attractor, for me, is proof of that. And that's why I feel that everyday sustainability is important. We understand that change in a part of a complex system affects the dynamic of the whole. We also know that patterns run very deep and often need big jolts to reform. Then we know that situations arise out of context through emergence. As a model, it fits with our current time, but paves the way for a more cooperative and community-focused future. The online platform, Shareable, expresses this movement, stating that new and resurgent solutions are democratizing how we produce, consume, govern, and solve social problems. The maker movement, collaborative consumption, the solidarity economy, open source software, transition towns, open government, and social enterprise are just a few of the movements showing a way forward based on sharing. We also need awareness. We need to be noticing the patterns and behaviours that form our habits. It is these habits that keep us reproducing our unsustainable lifestyles. We have the capacity to make a choice between acting in habitual ways or taking a different step, a new turn, forging a new path. Then, when we tell other people about our efforts in conversation, perhaps we shape and change their world too with our story. It is our responsibility as members of the human community to start having conversations about how we can ensure a more sustainable future. We each have a contribution to make towards living more sustainably. Why should we leave it up to someone else? What's important is for you to connect with what is really important for you now in your life, in this moment. It seems to me that, generally speaking, our values have become decoupled from our intentions and actions. We need to realign them, and we need to recognize the social and environmental impact of our actions. We can use story to communicate values. Earlier, I mentioned Charles Eisenstein's view that a news story can only be held in community. To some extent, we can achieve this holding by surrounding ourselves with people who have similar values. But at some point, we will need to begin having conversations with people who have different values if we are going to begin to shift mindsets. Viewing ourselves as leaders in our collective pursuit to build a better world can invigorate us to act. I'm not referring to the traditional conception of leader. Our current model of leadership is not fit for purpose. One person with a vision charging ahead into the future hasn't served us so well. We are living with complexity, uncertainty, and unpredictability. We need to reassess what it means to be a leader, and we need to find ways to work in a world that's constantly changing. For Otto Scharmer, author of Theory U and founder of ULab, a MOOC which has engaged over 100,000 people worldwide, he knows how to start a movement. Anyways, for him, this leadership arises from people and groups who are capable of letting go of established ideas, practices, and even identities. Most of all, this leadership comes as people start to connect deeply with who they really are and their part in both creating what is and realizing a future that embodies what they care about deeply. This leadership, which here I will call co-leadership, because it is something we have to do together, isn't just about holding a shared vision. It's about inspiration. Here's what Otto has to say about that. All real creativity and profound innovation and all deep civilizational renewal are based on the same source, the capacity for sustained attention, the capacity to immerse ourselves in something, stay with it, and then finally, when we are lucky, catch the spark of inspiration and move with it in order to bring the new reality as it requires. It is also about following. To build a better future, we all need to be crazy dancers, and I invite you to take a moment to Google crazy dancers when you have a chance. We all need to hold a shared vision of the future we want. Our role as co-leaders is to share that message, and we need to follow people who we think have similar values to us. because it's by finding those people who we think our values are in alignment with that we come upon our collective vision. And that's what we need right now. Business leader Margaret Heffernan puts it like this: there's a lot at stake now. We won't solve our problems if we expect it to be by a few supermen or superwomen. Now we need everybody. It is only when we accept that everybody has value that we will liberate the energy, imagination, and momentum we need. Creating new visions of the future is one of the things that distinguishes the Transition Network's approach I mentioned earlier. Rather than campaign against a grim and disastrous portrayal of the future, they say we should start by creating a positive vision of the future we want. What is that vision of a sustainable future for us now? A realistic pursuit would be for us to aim to build sustainable communities, like the one from my future vision story earlier. It's realistic because we all live somewhere, so we have a place from which to begin. So what are the ingredients for sustainable communities? They are built on values that are good for people and the earth, which foster a sense of belonging and support reconnection to our land. The economy is collaborative and is enabled by internet technologies and connected networks of people. A place-based focus encourages meaningful interactions and trust between people, embracing openness, inclusivity, and the value of the commons, bringing power and control back into the hands of the people. Through cooperatives and community land trusts in which assets generate wealth for the people, not corporations. Enterprises emerge that contribute not to profitability and growth, but to human well-being, built on a culture of collaboration and shared ownership. Consumption is redefined as a collaborative, shared co-production of services and products, supplying fundamental human needs. This focus on the foundational supports civic engagement and the creation of meaningful work in a thriving local economy. We see the localization of food production and distribution through growing initiatives and the widespread use of renewable energy. Initiatives by local people are supported. Development and regeneration is genuinely bottom-up. Participatory democracy practices are standard and mediated by internet technologies. And last, but possibly most significantly, sustainable communities enable individual and collective creativity because they create conditions in which all people's needs are met. People can flourish. The folks from the Public Interest Research Centre believe that to build a more sustainable, equitable, and democratic world, we need an empowered, connected, and durable movement of citizens. To support this movement, we can harness the power of the internet to bring us together through our network platform, Campfire Convention. We have individual responsibility to act now towards a more sustainable future. We all need to be leaders and we need to follow, because it's the first follower that starts a movement, and we need to show others how to follow too. We need to change the stories we tell about ourselves and our lives. We need story to help us deliver the messages about a sustainable future. In the act of weaving a new story with our words, we can weave a web of strange attractors. I've asked a lot of questions. My sense is that we don't have the answers yet. We need to look outside of ourselves to see what's happening here, in this room, between us, in our communities and in other places. It is a dark time, but we have to be hopeful about what we can achieve. We each have the capacity to create the change we want to see. Jean-Paul Sartre insisted all his life that what mattered was not the past at all, it was the future. One must keep moving, creating what will be, acting in the world, and making a difference to it. I like this existentialist theme. Be realistic, demand the impossible, and don't forget the importance of stories for building a better future. It is clear to me we are gathering. The future is coming. We can collectively imagine the world anew. Let's begin.